Mr. President, today is the day, March the 5th, the deadline imposed by President Trump on those who are being protected and allowed to stay in the United States under the DACA program. It was last September 5th when President Trump held a press conference. The Attorney General backed him up and said, that's it. The protection that currently is given to 780,000 young people in America, allowing them to stay in this country and pursue their dreams, will end on March the 5th of 2018. Today. 780,000 who were brought to the United States as infants, toddlers, children, and teenagers, who've lived their lives in this country, gone to school, never had a serious run-in with the law, went through criminal background checks, came up with a $500 filing fee, and were given permission under an executive order of President Obama to legally stay in this country for 2 years at a time. During that period, they would not be deported, and they'd be allowed to work. Who are these young people? Well, they're known as the Dreamers, although President Trump hates that term. They're known as the Dreamers because they represent young people who went to school in America, stood up in their classroom every day and pledged allegiance to that flag. This is the only country they've ever known. This was to be the country of their future. But at some point in their lives, a member of the family sat down and said, we've got to have a serious conversation. You see, we never filed the papers when we brought you to this country as an infant. And right now, you are undocumented in the United States of America. What that means is that at any minute, there could be a knock on the door, and you and perhaps your entire family would be asked to leave. I introduced a bill called the DREAM Act 17 years ago. Senator Hatch was my co-sponsor when I introduced it. The purpose of the DREAM Act was to say to these young people, we'll give you a chance. Though you are illegal in the eyes of the law of the United States, undocumented, we will give you a chance to earn your way to legal status, give you a chance someday to be a citizen of the United States. It won't be easy. No helping hand for you. You want to go to college? There'll be no federal assistance for you. You're going to have to make it on your own. You'll have to work harder than perhaps the person sitting next to you at the desk in high school. See if you can do it. And if you can, we'll give you your chance. That's what the DREAM Act said. It's passed with a majority vote in the Senate many times, but it's never quite made it to 60 votes, which it needs to become the law of the land. President Obama, when he was a senator here in this chamber, was my colleague from Illinois. He co-sponsored the DREAM Act with me, and so the day came when he was elected president, and I wrote him a letter. Dick Lugar, a Republican of Indiana, joined me in that letter. He'd been a supporter of the DREAM Act when he served in the Senate. We wrote to President Obama and said, can you do anything as president to give these young people a chance, to spare them from deportation? He worked on it for a year, and then President Obama came up with something called DACA, a program by executive order that gave these young people their chance. 780,000 of them went through the background check, paid their filing fee, and proved that they were eligible. And they were spared for 2 years at a time and allowed to stay in this country. During the course of the campaign, President Trump said many strong words about immigration. We remember them well, it's hard to forget. Words about the wall, words about Mexican rapists, on and on. But he seemed to have a soft spot in his heart for these kids. Many times he would talk about, you know, we've got to give them a chance. They're different. The very first time I met President Donald Trump was minutes after he'd been sworn in. It was at a luncheon here in the Capitol. And I went up to him and said, Mr. President, congratulations, and I want to thank you for the kind words you've said about the Dreamers. and those who are protected by DACA. And he said, Dick, don't worry about those kids. We're going to take care of those kids. That's what the president said on January the 20th, 2017. I brought it up to him several other times, too. It's an issue that's important to me, but more importantly, it's an issue that's critical to the future of these young people. But then what happened on September 5th of last year, just 9 months after the president was sworn in? He held a press conference and said that's the end of the protection for these young people. As of March 5th of 2018, no protection. And then he challenged Congress. He said, pass a law. Do what you're supposed to do here in the House and the Senate. Pass a law that will protect these young people. A number of us took up the president's challenge. We had a bipartisan effort, 6 of us, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, and we worked through some really hard issues on immigration and on these young people. I want to salute my colleagues who were part of that. Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina. Jeff Flake, Republican of Arizona. Cory Gardner, Republican of Colorado. Joined with myself and Michael Bennet, Democrat of Colorado. Bob Menendez, Democrat of New Jersey. And we put together an approach which gave these young people protection and a fighting chance to prove that they deserve to stay in America. We felt pretty good about it. The president called a meeting in the White House on January the 9th. I remember these dates. I'll always remember them. January 9th of this year, with about 24, 25 members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, and he held an open press conference for an hour. It was unusual, rarely done in the White House. And we talked about DACA, and we talked about Dreamers, and we talked about what was going to happen next, since the president had given us a deadline of today, March 5th, to do something. And the president outlined what he wanted to see, and then he said, in front of the television cameras, you send me the bill and I will sign it. I'll take the heat on this one. That was January the 9th. So a number of us, the 6 that I mentioned earlier, came together immediately that same day and said, let's finish this bill, let's get it in his hands as quickly as possible. By January the 11th, 2 days later, we were ready. We had reached a compromise, and it truly was a compromise. Parts of it I didn't care for at all, but that's what you do around here if Democrats and Republicans are going to produce something that might become a law. We called the president, we met with the president, Senator Graham, myself, and a number of others, and he totally rejected what we had done. In fact, the president went on to reject 5 other bipartisan proposals to try to solve this problem. The same president who said on January 9th of this year, you send me a bill and I'll sign it, turned down bipartisan option after bipartisan option. He just said no. We had a vote on the floor of the Senate. It's been about 3 weeks ago now. And it was a vote on 4 different proposals to deal with this challenge. Not one of those proposals received 60 votes. The one that I'd hoped for, the DREAM Act, the simple DREAM Act that I'd introduced, was put together by Senator Coons and brought to the floor. If I remember, it had 52 votes, needed 60 votes, fell short. The bipartisan compromise the 6 of us had put together with the president's opposition ended up with 54 votes, 6 votes short of what it needed to pass. And then the president's proposal, his own immigration proposal, came up here on the floor of the Senate. Now, you know there are 49 Democrats and 51 Republicans in the Senate. The president's proposal came up and got 39 votes, 60 votes in opposition. It was a rejection by his own party and the Democrats in the Senate. So here we are on March 5th. The deadline is here. No bill has passed the Senate. The House won't even consider the measure, will not take up any version of the measure. And what's at stake? 780,000 young people protected by DACA, which officially, by President Trump's order, ends today. They have one ray of hope, perhaps two. Two courts have said, we're going to suspend this abolition of DACA until we hear the arguments of the president's authority and the Constitution. So there is a temporary, and I underline temporary, injunction in place while these cases are pending. But I can tell you, as a member of the Senate and as a lawyer, no one can predict how long that protection will last. Is it a matter of days or weeks or months at best? And that's what these young people live with, this uncertainty. This humanitarian crisis in this country, and I call it that, was created by President Trump on September 5th. He has failed to agree to 6 different bipartisan proposals to solve the problem he created. And now these lives hang in the balance. Well, who are they? Who are these young people? I was with one of them earlier today. Her name is Anna Flores. Anna grew up in Aurora, Illinois, went to the public schools there, a very bright young woman. Brought to the United States at the age of 5 from Mexico by her parents. She's undocumented in America and lives under the protection of DACA. What did she do with her life? She went to the Illinois Institute of Technology. It's one of the best in the nation. And she won a civil engineering degree there. Clark Dietz is an engineering firm in Illinois that stepped up and said, we want that bright young woman on our staff as an engineer, and they hired her. And I met her for the first time today. She's a wonderful person. She's struggled against the odds all of her life. She's protected by DACA, the program that officially, under President Trump's edict, ends today. Will we be a better state, Illinois, a better city, Chicago, a better nation with this young lady and her engineering talents at work for us? Of course. There's no question about it. Why in the world would we ever want to deport someone who has gone through our educational system and excelled like this young lady? She's not the only one by any means. This is a photo here of Elizabeth Vilkas. She's the 109th dreamer that I've spoken about on the floor of the United States Senate. Brought here to the United States at the age of 7. She grew up in Yonkers, New York. As a child, she heard about STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and math, and she decided to make that her life's work. She excelled in math and science and decided she would be part of the future of this country when it came to these important subjects. She says, and I quote, from that point forward, when I heard about STEM subjects, I made pursuing a career in STEM my responsibility as an American. During high school, Elizabeth was a member of the Honor Society, the Key Club, Architecture, Construction, Engineering program, editor of the yearbook, played on the volleyball team. She graduated high school with an advanced Regents diploma. She was then accepted into the Honors College at City University, New York, City College. Remember, these dreamers, these undocumented students don't qualify for federal assistance to go to school, as most kids do. They have to find another way to work and save the money or take private loans. She received the Community Service Award from the School of Engineering 4 years in a row for her work organizing engineering education programs for low-income students. She received the Student Leader Award for her work with an engineering student association. She was named Volunteer of the Year 4 years in a row for managing the Manhattan Robotics Competition. I've seen those robotics competitions. A lot of young people in high school do some amazing things in these competitions, and it launches a career and a life in the STEM subjects. Elizabeth graduated with a double major in mechanical engineering and political science. She worked as an engineer for Samsung for 2 years. Then she founded a nonprofit organization focused on creating funding opportunities for early-stage technology startups. Today, Elizabeth's nonprofit has over 700 members. To date, they have raised over $8 million to grow their companies. She wrote me a letter, and Elizabeth said, "To me, DACA is the opportunity to give back to the United States and my family the way I dreamed of since I was 10 years old. It's the ability to help solve the STEM talent shortage after 15 years of preparing for it and being told it was impossible. It's the power to say no to going back to the shadows, and yes to serving as a role model for young girls across the country who aspire to be engineers and entrepreneurs. People like Elizabeth are the reason more than 400 business leaders signed a letter to Congress urging us to pass the Bipartisan DREAM Act. The letter says, and I quote, "Dreamers are vital to the future of our companies and our economy. With them, we grow and create jobs. They are part of why we will continue to have global competitive advantage." It would be a personal tragedy for us to deport Elizabeth Filkes, but the decision of President Trump to abolish the program that protects her makes that, sadly, a real possibility. If this injunction by the court is lifted, at that moment, there could be a knock on her door, perhaps on the door of her company that hires her or her engineering firm. And she can be told that her time was up. Under President Trump, she has to leave the United States of America. President Trump has created this crisis. Instead of working toward a solution, he has rejected every bipartisan effort that has been sent his way to save the dreamers. What will happen next? Do we have to stand by and watch as these families are divided, as talented young people like Elizabeth and Anna are deported? Is that what we're all about? Is that what the president meant when he told me we'll take care of those kids? That's what it's come down to. It is the sad reality that all across America, hundreds of thousands of these young people now live in fear of deportation. They should be living, as Elizabeth said, outside the shadows and part of America and its future. What can we do about it? I'm at a loss. Unless and until this president accepts the responsibility to help us solve the problem he created, I'm afraid we'll never be able to rally the necessary Republican votes to make this a reality. It's up to President Trump. Part of the world that I come from in the Middle West, there's a saying that I'm going to clean up a little bit, and it goes something like this: any old mule can kick down a barn door, but it takes a carpenter to build one. This president has kicked down DACA, kicked it down in the dirt, and this is the day, the deadline that he set. The question is, does he have the will or the heart to rebuild it? Mr. President, I yield the floor.